And we are live here in the Bleacher Report app. If you guys are watching here in BR and not YouTube, how you doing, everybody? It's your boy Wardy, and we're back at it with our latest Metropolitan segment. And in case you guys don't know who I am, my name is Tyler Ward, better known as WardyNYM, where I carry the largest platform on YouTube, not directly affiliated with the Mets or SNY, with over 25,000 amazing Mets fan subscribers as we break down everything in season and off season that has to do with the New York Metropolitans. And today's show, we're going to break down my early trade deadline predictions for the Mets here, as there's a lot of questions leading up to said deadline. Will the Mets be both buyers and sellers? Will they sell more than buy? Will they buy more than sell? In today's show, we're going to talk about all those possibilities and ultimately what moves could be had for the Mets on the horizon as we inch oh so close to the MLB trade deadline, right around a month away at the time of us being live here in the BR app. So to everybody first chiming in here in the live chat, happy to have you in here. I see Steve, as always, great follower on the WardyNYM platform here in the live chat. Greatly appreciate that. Everybody that watches this on replay, let us know your big takeaways in the comments down below, as BR is going to come out and clip this in different segments when discussing each of the points here. But again, at the core of today's show, we're breaking down our New York Metropolitan trade deadline predictions. And I don't want to waste any time because we have a lot to get into. So let's break it down and do exactly that. And let's start with, in my opinion, what I think is a foregone conclusion, something that not only feels inevitable, but it's a matter of when, not if, this player is parted with either by the trade deadline or certainly at the absolute worst by this offseason. And that, of course, is the long tenure of Jeff McNeil at the second base position. Jeff McNeil, the 2022 batting champ for the Metropolitans, has fallen so far from grace since then, currently repping a bottom 5 worst OPS in all Major League Baseball. For a slap-hitting Jeff McNeil, who is so good at hitting it where they ain't, since the universal, shift has basically went away, where now you're going to have very limited shift options, so you don't have those glaring, gaping holes down the third baseline like you typically would see Jeff get, especially if it would be to hit it opposite field there, lefty-lefty matchup per se. He had a lot of room to go opposite field, and since that has changed, so has his game. He has been pulling the ball tremendously. The opposite field rates have continued to plummet, and he has been a shell of what he once was as a true contact king in this Mets lineup, along with providing solid defense. And when you don't even get competent defense from basically now a utility option in Jeff McNeil in both left field and at second base, and the Mets have eliminated his ability in the corner outfields with their depth that we're going to discuss a little bit later in the show with Harrison Bader, Tyron Taylor, DJ Stewart, all guys not named Brandon Nimmo, you're left with the reality that unless Jeff McNeil can somehow, some way become a player that he hasn't been in the past 2 years, his time in Queens is quickly coming to an end. So I guess the real question is, when is it going to happen, right? Because Jeff, of course, is still owed a couple years left on his contract after initially signing that $50 million extension under the Billy Epler era. And unfortunately, that was another Billy Epler disaster class instead of a master class of a trade. Now McNeil with a couple years left of control, still now sitting in close to his mid-30s. He's not getting any younger, and he has honestly been such a net negative for this Mets team in more ways than one this season that as we inch closer to the trade deadline, I do foresee a world where the Mets either A, consider him as a true utility option because they don't want to give him much playing time. They had no suitors. That, of course, is still in the cards and is a possibility. But as I discussed 2 weeks ago on the WardyNYM YouTube channel, and this still holds true, Jeff McNeil's days are numbered. And the reason why they're numbered here is everything that we just listed off, with a 212 average and a 70 WRC plus, so 30% below the natural league average hitter there at 100, a negative 0.4 WAR. He's a negative offensive and defensive player this year. McNeil, again, has fallen so far from grace, so whether he goes to, say, a team like the Seattle Mariners that could be looking for a second base help there, he could be of interest if, again, the Mets eat the majority of that salary. Wherever McNeil goes, if he is traded by this year's deadline, it will come with, unfortunately, the Mets having to eat a good portion of said salary. But it's not something that Steve Cohen is going to scoff at and be opposed to, because he has done this there and time again. When it goes back to the Robinson Cano deal, when, of course, that was under the Brody Van Wagenen era, but that didn't stop Steve Cohen from eating the remainder of his contract for a guy that's now raking in the Mexican League, just like Trevor Bauer. It's almost like you shouldn't take Mexican League numbers seriously. Color me shocked there. there. Then we get into, okay, James McCann, for example, more like James McCants. He, of course, the contract has been eating as he's been on a great team there in Baltimore as our backup for Adley Rutschman, doing fantastic things at the backstop. Then you get into, more recent picks by the Mets here. Even Omar Narvaez, $8 million owed this year. We don't care. You're going to play bad. We're going to DFA your butt. And that's exactly what they've done here. So Jeff McNeil, whether he is full-on DFA'd by the trade deadline or traded, it feels inevitable that his time in Queens is, in fact, coming to an end. So everybody watching us live on a replay, let me know your thoughts about Jeff McNeil, what looks like his uncertain future here, certainly an uncertain one at least, staying in Flushing, Queens here for the New York Metropolitans. And who can replace McNeil at second base during that time? Well, when you have Jose Iglesias hitting unbelievably well, a true contact king, the 34-year-old middle infielder, now since being called up by the Mets, has carried his weight and then some, had a 4-hit game and 3 RBIs just 48 to 72 hours ago against the Chicago Cubs. Sign me the heck up, especially against Shota Imanaga. You simply cannot go wrong. But when you have a guy like Luis Angel Acuna, who's been having a phenomenal month of June, is now batting .270 with over 700 OPS at the AAA level. And before you say, Wardy, why are we talking about Acuna here? He can't hit for power. Well, that is true. Acuna is definitely more of a singles hitter and going gap to gap when he is right, but he's a speed demon. He has electric defense when he's right and so much potential. I say give him an opportunity to be a lightning rod in this lineup, in the bottom of the order there, batting at the second base position, along with other internal options. Jet Williams, unfortunately, won't be one of the Mets' top prospect. He's likely out for the rest of the season after having, unfortunately, sustained wrist surgery that they tried to postpone. But now, in the meantime, in the interim, whether it's Jose Iglesias or someone else that the Mets consider in the organization, they do have some options. And honestly, I'm sure they could find a bat that is solid enough if they needed to for a short-term option, along with Iglesias at the second base position, should, say, Brett Beatty not step up and become our future second baseman there for potentially the remainder of the season, where he's been raking at the AAA level, has gotten some reps at the second base position, but the MLB level has just struggled oh so mightily to have that consistent bat. The Gold Glove defense has really been there at third base, but now that he needs to play second with Marky V commanding third, that creates a greater question for the Mets and their uncertainty at the position. Ronnie Mauricio, we all love, but Ronnie isn't coming back anytime soon. It'll be a blessing and Mauricio returns before the season ends, but I haven't heard anything on his rehab, nothing on his ramp-up whatsoever. So we'll see what the fate of Ronnie Mauricio holds for a guy that was anticipated to be their starting third baseman heading into the season initially. Bring up Acuna, says Swagner. I tend to agree with you. I really do, and I felt that way since a while. And, we talked a lot about Jeff McNeil there. I don't want to, beat a dead horse. We all know how we feel on that front. Let's talk about Pete Alonso, right? Because this is, in my opinion, a very, very polarizing topic, right? I want to know, everybody spamming the chat right now, if your guys are watching this on YouTube, as I might download this and clip it on YouTube after the fact, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Where do you stand on the future fate of Pete Alonso? Now, this is Pete, of course, who turned down a roughly $170 million extension by the Mets, 160, I believe, between 160 and 170 range, right around the trade deadline a year ago. And since then, Alonso had an unbelievably underwhelming month that we saw there in May, along with the rest of the Mets team, but has turned things on quite a bit here over the past couple weeks here in the month of June, where the Mets currently rep #1 in Major League Baseball with a season-high 13 wins in one singular month thus far for the Amazons. But Pete Alonso with 16 home runs, 42 RBIs at 241, 323, and 469 clip for a 127 WRC plus is a man that I'm here to tell you, as things currently stand, is not going anywhere. And it's exactly in part with the Mets playing the way that they have. The Mets were only going to be trading Pete Alonso if, one, they got simply an offer they can't refuse, right? We all know those quotes. Or secondly, the Mets free-falled so bad that you have to trade Pete Alonso because you don't see a future with him beyond the 2024 season. You think he's going to walk in free agency even if you give him a good deal. And the Mets, under David Stearns, have a reluctance to kind of want to throw these big contracts out, which I agree with. There's no reason to go balls to the wall crazy for a guy when you don't know what you're going to be getting on a consistent basis. And for Alonso, in a walk year where he's felt the pressure, has finally started turning on here in the month of June. But given the fact that the Mets are only a game out of a wild card spot at the time of us being live here, that being on June 24th at 1:23 p.m. Eastern time, and the Mets having a lot more games to play against some favorable schedule, not named their Subway Series starting tomorrow against the Yanks, you realize that, okay, the Mets might not only find themselves getting on a run for playoffs this year, but they may have one of the better lineups in all of not only the National League, but Major League Baseball. And in case you're wondering, okay, Wardy, just how good has the Mets offense been throughout the month of June, throughout the stretch? Well, everybody, to give you guys a little bit of insight, the New York Metropolitans currently lead all Major League Baseball in team OPS since the start of the month of June. And we currently sit here over 3 weeks into the month. So again, when things were absolutely raining and pouring in miserable May, things have been sunshine and rainbows here in a joyful June for a Mets team. And for all those reasons, unless they get a king's ransom, I just do not see a world where Pete Alonso is traded. I firmly believe that if Alonso's time in Queens comes to an end, it'll be this offseason when they decide to say allocate their money and focus elsewhere, should they not want to give Alonso a bag that he's probably going to be looking for as a Scott Boras client. So Alonso, I absolutely love. I'm excited to see what he can do the rest of the season. He's a man I still firmly believe has 45, 50-plus home run potential in him. I know that might be a tall task with the amount of games left, but it's not impossible. We've seen Alonso get on the great stretches that he has been on. And should the Mets continue to roll here and have that power protection with JD Martinez ahead of him, and of course to have Francisco Alvarez and Mark Vientos behind him, good things are naturally going to happen. He's going to get more pitches to hit than what he's seen in recent years. This is the best lineup Pete Alonso's ever been a part of, you could rightfully argue, since becoming a net Metropolitan back in the 2019 season as a rookie, winning the home run derby, and of course winning the rookie home run record that he broke, surpassing Mr. Aaron Judge, in which they'll be facing off tomorrow. So that's what I have to say on the Pete Alonso front. I absolutely love Pete, but I'm not in favor of Pete getting, $30+ million a year on a contract unless it's a shorter term type deal, say 4 or 5 years. If we go 7-year plus range, I do have concerns with how Alonso projects, one, and two, his consistency is another. As much as I love Pete Alonso, we know that, again, this is not a one-team type sport, if that makes sense. The Mets lose Alonso, they will be able to figure out ways to really rectify the lineup without him. Will it be easier said than done? Yes, absolutely. But do I think the sky completely falls flat on its face if Pete Alonso isn't a New York Metropolitan next season? I can't say that's the truth when you look at this current core group, the Mets have won absolutely nothing with it, right? We've had entertaining baseball throughout the regular seasons, but I want to see entertaining games when it matters most, when you push for playoffs. And I know that, again, it's not an individual sport. It's a team sport. There's no I in team. However, Pete Alonso has yet to prove truly his worth to the Mets outside of his in-season heroics. And when it comes to clutchness, that's another thing that I want to see Pete Alonso step up greatly with. We saw to a degree over the past couple of weeks, but I want to see it to a higher magnitude, to say the least. So, Pete Alonso, love you, Pete. Hope you stay. But if you don't, I won't be surprised if he's parted with by the offseason, not by this year's trade deadline. That'll really color me surprised if the Mets go out of their way and trade him by the deadline, should they be in a similar position than what they're currently in, which I think is true. Let's see. Is Diaz getting suspended for getting thrown out? Yes, he is. Unfortunately, Drew, it's an automatic 10-game suspension that he can appeal. I don't believe he's going to be appealing or anything like that. We'll see. We'll soon find out what happens on that front. But yes, unfortunately, Edwin Sugar Diaz, the Mets all-star closer, just came back, unfortunately, from injury, is now out for the next 10 games. And the Mets are down a reliever just after losing Sean Reed-Foley there to his shoulder impingement a day prior. So if you want to hear my more explained, thorough thoughts on that, I had a big live show yesterday, our Mets post-game segment, as the Mets won that series against the Cubs, live on YouTube and on Twitter at WardyNYM. Check it out in case you guys and gals haven't already. Thank you so much in advance. So we talked about McNeil. How you doing, Mama Worm? Happy to have you in here as always. We have Alonso that we broke down. Now let's talk about what the reports have been. And the reports have suggested, per Mike Puma, that we just did in a video yesterday on the WardyNYM platform, the Mets are expected to sell some starting pitching by the deadline, but still be buyers by said deadline. And if you're wondering, how does that make any sense? How can the Mets be both buyers and sellers? Well, the answer is pretty simple. The Mets have a boatload of mid-level rotation options, and they have multiple on 1 or 2 year deals. What they don't have is a lot of frontline talent currently in this rotation, but they are expected to receive said frontline talent in the coming days, as soon as this Thursday, where Christian Scott is expected to be called up sometime over the next week or so to command a 6-man rotation that Carlos Mendoza said himself yesterday. 1 and 2. Kodai Senga pitched a live bullpen yesterday of 20-plus pitches, looked sharp. He will have another live bullpen before they really continue to ramp up from there. So for Senga, who will not return to the Mets rotation until sometime in the second half of the season, post-All-Star break, he's a guy that the Mets are expecting to return him, essentially have that Jacob deGrom impact, where you got your trade deadline acquisition. And if you slot Kodai Senga, Christian Scott, and maybe even the Jose Buto in this rotation, I'm in favor of all three of those guys over some current options, whether it's Tyler McGill. Jose Quintana was great against the Cubs, but I still don't trust him. The soft-tossing lefty needs pinpoint accuracy to have consistent success every time out there, and he has been Jekyll and Hyde, of course. And then you get other guys like Sean Manaea, which, similar fashion, they can be strong, but they struggle to go past 5 innings on the regular. So Luis Severino, I would like to preface, is not a guy I see the Mets trading away whatsoever unless they get a king's ransom and they're like, you know what? We could trade away Sevy and still push for playoffs. If that's the case, okay. I don't foresee that to be the case, however, after having 6 shutty, including 10 Ks yesterday for Mr. Luis Severino against the Chicago Cubs in that series finale, that rubber match, which was beautiful that we love to see. But on the pitching front, again, there's a couple guys I think we could see the Mets part with while still adding. And this is my question to each and every one of you, because for me, I have it as 2 things. I have one, I definitely see a world where the Mets trade away one of Jose Quintana. Jose, of course, has a high ERA, has not been great this season, still below 5 after a strong start against the Cubs, but not ideal still. Then we have Sean Manaea with just over a 4 ERA this season, who has been serviceable for sure, but Sean definitely struggles, especially that 3rd time in the order. He definitely labors to go deep into ball games. He is, again, at best, pretty much your 5-and-out type pitcher. Then you get other guys like a Tyler McGill or David Peterson. Both those guys have club control in their contracts and have options to a degree. Both of them are still under contract for a couple years. So if you want to part ways with some young, more controllable starting pitching talent in return for either immediate help for, say, the bullpen that could help you this season, which the Mets could certainly use it to a degree, or different aspects of the lineup, or simply wanting young talent to focus beyond the 2024 season, my question to each and every one of you is, which guys out of everyone that I just listed would you be most comfortable with the Mets parting with? Pick one of Sean Manaea and Jose Quintana, one of them, because I don't see both being traded. I'd be surprised if that happened a little bit, honestly, because injuries inevitably happen with rotations, and you don't want to trade too much rotation depth where, okay, you're down a couple guys in a week span, and then just like that, the Mets are absolutely screwed in their rotation hopes of pushing for playoffs, versus Tyler McGill and David Peterson, 2 controllable arms. McGill just got absolutely lit up his last start. Peterson looked sharp for the most part. Which one out of those 2 in each groups of the 2 groups would you guys like to see dealt and why? Let me see in the live chat down below. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, potentially as it will be clipped, let me know in the comments down below as well. If you want my humble opinion between Tyler McGill and David Peterson, it's kind of a toss-up because I think both of them may profile best as relievers. David Pearson, I think there's a little bit more interest level because he's a southpaw, when the Mets don't really have many guys of the talent of the southpaw arsenal that David Pearson has. He started the season trying to be more of a ground ball pitcher, yet his last outing was like peak 2022 David, where he was striking out batters well, had that sweeper slider working, and of course that fastball when it was working to his ability, but he wasn't overusing it each time out there. Versus a Tyler McGill with a 6 to 7 pitch mix, he's throwing the kitchen sink at you. He's had a high strikeout rate, but he's struggled to go deep into games that we know, and probably profiles best as a reliever. Versus Jose Quintana and Sean Manaea, Sean is a guy that has experience in the bullpen, has been a swing man in the years past for both the Giants and even to a degree with the Padres, whereas Jose Quintana doesn't have those same type of, experience, nor is Jose Quintana as good of an overall pitcher than Sean Manaea in their respective parts of their career right now, you would rightfully argue. Sean has higher velo. I love his sweeper as well. Versus Quintana, again, you need that pinpoint accuracy. So you're putting everything together there. I'm honestly not opposed to seeing a Jose Quintana and a McGill or Peterson being dealt by the deadline, with the Mets still buying, because there is starting pitching talent out there outside of internal options, headlined by Kodai Senga, Christian Scott, and of course Jose Buto, who I like quite a bit, to suggest that, okay, the Mets have internal options, but who's not to say that they don't want to go out of their way for some external ones? And there's a couple guys in particular that really stand out to me, some of which I think make a lot more sense than others that we're going to get to shortly. But before we break down those starting pitching options and what they could be, because that goes in hand with the White Sox, the Marlins, and the Rockies as potential trade suitors for the Mets leading up to the deadline. Harrison, how you doing? To everybody watching live here in the BR app, thank you so much. Really does mean a lot, everybody. Greatly appreciate it. But now let's talk a bit briefly on the outfield configuration, right? You got Brandon Nimmo on the left, you got Bader in center, and you got one of Marte, Taylor, or DJ Stewart in the right. Starling Marte has been batting so well this season, but the legs have been an issue, and he is now getting an MRI this Monday on that knee to see how serious his soreness has been. When you look at the outfield configuration, I think a couple things could be had. One, while I don't expect it to happen, I'm going to just throw it out there. Starling Marte is a desirable player for plenty of teams in Major League Baseball should the Mets be willing to eat a portion of that salary and part ways with him elsewhere. The Mets really want to view this as more of a long-term play by the deadline. That is a play that I could foresee at least them considering, knowing that Marte's bat has been superior this season. We're not complaining about Marte's offensive abilities this year. They have been great. They're looking more and more like the 2022 Marte, where the Mets won 101 games. However, the defense has been such a liability. He has been the worst right fielder defensively in Major League Baseball per DRS and, OAA, all that stuff that you see there in right field. And secondly, Marte, how much playing time is he going to get consistently throughout the 162? That's another good question. So while there's uncertainty on Marte, I don't think it's a huge lock for him to be traded should the Mets still be buying. But when you look at DJ Stewart, Harrison Bader, and Tyrone Taylor, there's definitely a world where at least one of those guys is dealt, especially with Drew Gilbert, Mets' top outfield prospect, is returning to injury this mid-July here to the Syracuse Mets. He's been out in the majority of the season with a full hamstring tear, unfortunately. His rehab was slower than expected, but if Gilbert, again, placed his caliber, he's a guy that could be impacting this Mets team before the end of the season. So when you have, again, in my opinion, a bit of a logjam, they're awesome options currently because you want as much depth as humanly possible. That is played into the Mets' hand with their lineup configuration each day, defensive replacements, and pinch hitting matchups. I haven't been opposed to it whatsoever. But DJ Stewart, while he has a great eye at the plate, struggles to carry his own, is a DH really through and through, can play right field but can't play it well. You're concerned about his defense out there. DJ Stewart is a bat I could definitely see the Mets parting ways with for even some relief help again this trade deadline. Tyrone Taylor has fallen from grace quite a bit as being this awesome contact fastball hitting cane earlier in the season, provides awesome defense in center, left, and right, which we appreciate, but he is, again, a guy that you can replace. Harrison Bader, who has been unbelievably clutch for the Mets this season. He has hit very well, batting right around 270 or so with over 700 OPS. He has been one of the most clutch hitters for the Mets this season, has exemplified great defense outside of butting heads with Starling Marte, where I'm going to honestly give out of the doubt to Bader more often than not because Marte is the not superior defender between the two. Superior arm, not a superior defender, to clarify things. So between those three, I definitely see a world where at least one of them is traded, and for obvious reasons to help allocate other areas, knowing the internal options the Mets have in AAA, among others. So out of those three players, if we're going to exclude Starling Marte, because let's just say that's a tall task to actually try to trade him. If we're going to talk about the core three here, not named Brandon Nimmo and Harrison Bader, Tyrone Taylor, and DJ Stewart, which of the three do you guys think will be dealt and why? Let me know in the chat, in the comments down below, everything in between. Greatly appreciate. But that's definitely something I think is going to happen. I felt this way for really a month and a half now on the outfield. It just makes sense with the depth they currently have, the depth they have internally that are hopefully going to be coming back soon, and the Drew Gilberts especially, and go from there. But now let's get into the most fun aspect of today's discussion, in my opinion, and that is the suitors for the Mets. Now, could the Mets trade with teams, again, in playoff caliber position? Absolutely. When you're a buyer and a seller, that's what you do. But in the case here of the White Sox, the Marlins, and the Rockies, there are multiple reasons why each of these teams makes sense for the most part. And let's start with the obnoxious, the obvious one, which is the Chicago White Sox. I'm butchering everything. White Sox. This guy doesn't take a breath. Stop talking. No, Jerry, we're going to continue to talk, my friend. If you don't like it, just get out of here. That's all I got to say. I talk very fast and I talk often. And I appreciate everyone's patience, or of course, staying with me if that makes sense, as I got a lot to say. But on the White Sox, I do, because there's one man from the Chicago White Sox I've wanted since the offseason, and the reason why I've wanted him since the offseason is because David Stearns has wanted him since the offseason, Mets President Baseball Operations. If you're wondering who this is in fact Erick Fedde. Erick Fedde, remember the schmuck with the Washington Nationals when he was batting practice? Well, he went to the KBO for a year or two, and since then he comes back, and he has been absolutely fantastic. And David Stearns tried to sign him to a one-year deal this offseason. However, he signed a 2-year deal with the White Sox to be a true everyday starter for them. Not every day, but you know what I'm saying, in that rotation. And Erick Fedde has since then went on to be a very serviceable starter and probably one of the hottest commodities among starters by this year's trade deadline. Erick Fedde this season in just under 100 innings has an 8.2 K per nine, a 2.29 walks per nine, which us Mets fans can greatly appreciate, where we absolutely need help with this rotation and not walking everyone their mother. A 3.05 ERA and a 3.37 expected ERA. Why is that important, you might ask? Because the expected numbers tell you that, again, he has very much been in hand with his normal ERA. So the defense behind him, regardless of that being a factor, he has been a very serviceable starter so far this season. And Eric Fedde, again, while he's going to cost you a decent return for a guy that isn't on a long-term deal, but will be hot commodity by the deadline, the Mets do definitely have enough assets to make that happen. They can part ways with some prospect talent that maybe they don't view as highly of, whereas an incompetent organization like the White Sox and Gets might view as a great deal. I'm sorry to select a few White Sox fans out there that might come across this, but the reality is you have an incompetent owner, you have an incompetent front office, and you guys simply do not know how to properly evaluate your talent whatsoever. Why didn't you trade Dylan Cease by the trade deadline last year? Because you got stubborn and you waited too little too late when you would have gone a stronger haul than what you got from the Padres, even though Drew Thorpe is an exciting prospect who was initially a top pitching prospect for the Yankees last year, a part of that Juan Soto trade, and then flipped again for Dylan Cease. My point is Eric Fedde is absolutely an arm I expect David Stearns and the Mets to keep tabs on. And again, if they're not going to be buying big much at the deadline for starters, Eric Fedde is in that select group of a guy on a 1 or 2 year contract. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg for more controllable guys we're going to discuss here in a second, and can be serviceable for you right away for not only the 2024 season, but beyond that as well. Now, to get into a bit more here on not only Eric Fedde, let's talk about a guy that, again, you're shooting for the stars and trying to land, but it would be foolish to not, at minimum, have yourself a call. I'm sure David Stearns will do exactly that, because as much as I love a lot of these Mets prospects, I love Garrett Crochet even more. Garrett Crochet, the young, dominant southpaw there, multiple years of control still from the White Sox. The 25-year-old is having himself an amazing season. An 88.2 innings pitch, a whopping just under 13 K per nine, a measly 2.03 walks per nine, a 3.25 ERA, a 2.43 expected ERA, a 2.59 FIP, a strikeout machine, which is Garrett Crochet, already with 124 punchies on this season. If the Mets want to get crazy, if they want to say, you know what, we're going to buy big by the deadline, but we're going to buy big for controllable talent, which makes sense for both short and long-term vision. Mind you, this is the same David Stearns that was kicking tires on a lot of young, controllable assets with opposing teams throughout the offseason, because he wanted to add more than just short-term options. He wanted to add guys that will actually give you a reason to part ways with some top prospects. And Garrett Crochet gives you every reason in the world to do exactly that. So again, I know the White Sox and Gets will be stubborn. They're going to ask for a king's ransom, so it's easier said than done here. But absolutely the Chicago White Sox, outside of, say, Eric Fedde and outside of maybe a Tommy Pham reunion, because why the heck not? It's not going to happen, but it's a fun discussion to be had. We have Garrett Crochet here, who the Mets absolutely should at minimum be considering. The same way they should at minimum be considering an outfield option for them that would warrant you trading away a Harrison Bader and or a Tyrone Taylor, because it makes all that much more sense of the world. And that is because you have a guy by the name of Luis Robert Jr. And Mr. Robert is not only fantastic, he's got multiple years of control. And yes, he is susceptible with injury. We know that with Mr. Luis Robert, but when he is right, he's one of the best outfielders in all Major League Baseball. And if you buy on him right now, you may be buying on a low in comparison to, say, even a year ago, where he was dominant. Luis Robert last year, the 25-year-old outfielder, had a 38 home run, 90 run, and 80 RBI, and 20 stolen bag season, with a 264, 315, and 542 clip for a 128 WRC plus and a 5-WAR player. So he himself accounted for basically 5 wins himself for a White Sox team. And that's huge for the White Sox, who don't win that often. This season, dealing with the ailments, unfortunately, has 7 home runs, 13 runs scored, 11 RBIs, 3 stolen bags in just 24 games, a 191 average, a 265 OBP, and a 472 slug for an even 100 WRC plus, a true league average batter. But Robert, who is not only phenomenal with the bat when he is right, has multiple years of control. This is a guy that you go out of your way to give up a haul for, especially if you pair him with, say, Fedde, or, again, if you want to give away the entire farm, you trade for both Crochet and Robert. I don't foresee David Stearns to do such a thing. Again, this is more pipe dreaming, but because it's the White Sox and because the Mets could absolutely use a star like Robert in this outfield beyond the 2024 season for them to get on a run later this season and in the years going forward, that'll also impact, say, how you want to go about the offseason trying to push for the guy from the Bronx the Mets are going to face tomorrow in Juan Soto. All the more reason to, at minimum, kick tires here and see what Gets is asking for. See if there's any type of unison and reaching on a trade between the two teams. If not, no worries, but you definitely want to bark up that tree at absolute minimum. And I know we have some people that don't love Luis Robert because of his health, and I understand that. It's definitely a red flag to a degree, but there's youth on his side, there's team control on his side, and ultimately there's talent that quite literally would take Flushing, Queens, and us fans by storm. So that's what I have to say on the Chicago White Sox. Now let's talk about a couple other teams here before we wrap up the show. Robert and Crochet would be nothing short of an absolute crazy blockbuster for sure. We'll be talking about that more on the channel. Very excited to get into that. Again, even if they don't happen, it's such a fun time to talk about these things because you know the possibilities are there should a team be crazy enough to go out of their way to do it and give up the haul that's likely going to take. And speaking of talking about crazy here, let's talk about trading in the division, shall we? Let's talk about how the Miami Marlins need to send Jesus Luzardo and Tanner Scott to the New York Mets. And I know, again, you're probably saying, Wardy, it's not going to happen. I'm here to tell you the Mets' ability to trade with the Marlins is far greater than you think. Because I assure you, Peter Bendix does not have this vendetta against the Mets trading in the division, say a Mike Rizzo, the schmuck that he is, what the Nationals might have with the Mets. It is not the same situation there. Bendix cares about one thing and one thing only, getting the best return on his value for assets he's going to trade, rehauling that Marlins organization again because they do nothing right. So Bendix coming over from the Tampa Bay Rays, and now as their new helm, as their GM, is looking to make some big changes by the deadline. And Jesus Luzardo, who has been underwhelming this season, absolutely is still an arm I think the Mets should not only consider, but try to pounce on. And given his underwhelmingness this season, knowing he's on multiple years of control, isn't a free agent until the 2027 offseason. Jesus with a 5-year rate of 4.39 expected year rate, at just under 8 K per nine and just under 3 walks per nine. Last season, of course, in just under 180 innings, had a 3.58 year rate, a 3.96 expected year rate, a roughly 11 K per nine, and 2.77 walks per nine. He's had some dominant years in the past couple of years there for the Miami Marlins when staying healthy. And I know Luzardo, again, has not been the most dominant young southpaw in Major League Baseball by any stretch this season. However, he's controllable. He's an arm that the Mets have been wanting for multiple years. The Mets actually turned down a trade to acquire him over a year ago for Brett Beatty. Probably a trade they would have liked to have back in hindsight, but again, hindsight's 2020. It is what it is. Jesus Luzardo is an arm that would be brilliant for this Mets rotation to impact them beyond 2024, and this has so much talent that I think a pitching lab that is built in Port St. Lucie that the Mets have there, that they're working also with Hefner and others at the MLB level, can do wonders for Luzardo to kind of fine-tune, round out his game, and be a dominant southpaw for the Mets for years to come. Now you get on to Tanner Scott. Scott, what does he fill the need? He fills the need of wanting another short guarantee of a strong right-hander in this bullpen. And I know we want lefties too, and that's where the Rockies come into play here. We're going to get into it. Wardy's the best and a welcome distraction, Steve. I'm glad you feel that way, my friend. Thank you so much for being in here. But as we see with Tanner Scott, a roughly 10 K per nine to a 6 walks per nine, hate the walks per nine. So if the Mets are like, we got no interest there, that's perfectly fine. I don't blame him. Jake Diekman made me hate him for so long up until the Mets signed him. I still feel how I feel about Jake Diekman because he's Jekyll and Hyde with the walk rate. But Tanner Scott with a 1.64 ERA and 33 relief outings for the right-hander this season, a 3.52 expected ERA, a 3.9 FIP. Lots to like here about Mr. Tanner Scott. Again, a guy that can be very serviceable as a reliever for you in high-leverage situations for a Mets team that is trying to make sure that they have this bullpen rectified and rounded out throughout this stretch of this season. We know David Stearns works his bullpen very well, but again, if you're going to talk with the Miami Marlins, you might as well talk about a guy that will be traded by the deadline and the veteran right-hander in Tanner Scott. Again, this is one of those guys that I think makes so much sense for them and the impact that he can have for them this season, everybody. And I think when you look at Tanner Scott and everything that he brings, I actually realize that I made a great mistake, and I apologize about that. And honestly, it's hilarious I'm saying this. He makes even more sense, if I'm being quite honest. I personally hate Wardy. I have so much work to get done, but of course he's so entertaining, I can't turn him off as LFGM. It's personally hate. What is with the personal hate? What is going on here? But I appreciate you chiming in, no less, no matter how much you love or hate me. Scott is a southpaw, so I'd actually like to preface something. It even makes more sense for the Mets now that he's a lefty. And it honestly kind of scratches the Rockies thought I had in the second year. That's completely my fault. I apologize. I don't know why I was thinking that Scott wasn't a lefty. Maybe because I think of AJ Puck right away for the Marlins when I think of a lefty. He struggled mightily this year because he tried to stretch him as a starter, and that didn't work out. But now that I know Tanner Scott is for certain a lefty, it makes even more sense in the world to make sure that you're going out of your way to try to acquire someone like him because he fits the role of a dominant lefty along with Jake Diekman. Danny Young, of course, is an option. I would say Brandon Scott and potentially part ways with Diekman if he continues to be Jekyll and Hyde this season. Keep Danny Young in the bullpen. Brooks Raley, your main southpaw option, is out for the year and is never going to pitch for the Mets again. That's what I got to say about that. So Tanner Scott, absolutely, along with Jesus Luzardo, bring all the southpaws basically from Miami, bring them to Queens. Again, these guys are going to cost you an arm and a leg on the control itself, but still enough where I think David Stearns would absolutely warrant trying to do said thing leading up to the deadline, should they be buying in the way that we kind of expect them to, now just one game out of a playoff spot. And last but not least, let's talk briefly here about the Rockies. But before I do, let's see, what do you think Quintana, McNeil, or McGill would get us toward? Not a whole lot. You're really not going to get a lot, but what you could get is more certainty in rectifying your bullpen this season, along with also trying to see what the future of this club. So if you trade, say, Mania, which is a solid amount of value right now, McGill with club control, you can get assets back that then you can flip, say, come the off season if you want to continue to build a farm, or again, just helping to rectify this bullpen, I think is a big thing as well. Wanting it to be rounded out. That's where it makes sense to me. But to put a cap in this, let's talk about the Rockies briefly, because they have a southpaw reliever that actually could make some sense for the Mets. There's actually Mets fans in the past who have brought him up on my channel, and I agree with them. Jalen Beeks. Jalen Beeks, of course, a former Tampa Bay Ray turned Colorado Rocky, has a 3.76 ERA as a southpaw reliever there in Colorado. And that's never an easy thing to do, to be a good reliever for the Rockies. So already you got me on your radar. 2, it's the Rockies, so you know they're going to be selling. And 3, Jalen Beeks is going to cost you probably absolutely nothing to try to acquire. So if the Mets do not trade internally for internally as in the NL East for, say, a Miami Marlins Tanner Scott, they may pivot or say prioritize and prefer from the Colorado Rockies and Jalen Beeks, which makes a lot of sense for them as another quality southpaw option for them, a short-term option for them in their bullpen. Basically just trying to make sure you have proper options outside of Jake Diekman. And Danny Young has been fantastic, but I have more concerns right now with Jake Diekman than I do Danny Young. So for those reasons, that's why I say you enter a guy like Jalen Beeks who can fit that role as well. And again, for a Mets team that is currently slotted to be both buyers and sellers by the deadline, by emphasis here, buying is, of course, looking for potentially some starting pitching talent, bullpen help, etc., rectifying and rounding out your roster, whereas selling, you're giving away some starting pitching talent that you really don't need because you have internal options that are already going to be better than them, i.e. Kodai Senga, Kristen Scott, and to a degree, Jose Buto. But everybody, that is going to do it for the live show. I want to thank you all so much for watching. No matter how much you loved, agreed, or disagreed with my proposals here and my early belief on the Mets as they approach the MLB trade deadline a month from now, I greatly appreciate you all taking the time to watch and listen wherever you did. So this is going to be it for your boy Wardy. Check out my work on YouTube at WardyNYM. We come at you with consistent post-game coverage after every single game this season. We have a lot of content unrolling here heading into the month of July, as it's going to be rumor season galore leading up to the MLB trade deadline. So until I see you guys again, have a great rest of your night, day, evening, whenever you're watching this. This is your boy Wardy signing out. Let's go Mets, baby. Peace out, everybody. Have a great one, folks.